I can remember when my grandfather died. I was at basketball practice and my dad came into the gym. Now, this was unusual because he never came to school. So when I saw him, I knew something was up. But what was it? And when he had told me that my grandfather had passed and that we were leaving that afternoon for the funeral, I didn't know what to do or what to say. You know what? And years later, when my father-in-law passed away, I was caught in a similar situation. I had found him after he had an accident in the bathroom. And again, there I was struggling with what I saw, trying to figure out how I could protect my wife from the hurt that I knew she would deeply feel. And while today my guest is not only going to share an inspiring grief story of his own, but we're going to learn what we can do to cope with grief for ourselves and how we can help others. Now, before we get into that, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, husband, and an entrepreneur, then I'm going to encourage you to participate in our Band of Brothers group mentorship program. We're just a group of ordinary guys working towards living extraordinary lives. You can find all this information at the Awakened Man Trading Academy at members.net. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. So let me ask you, have you lost someone that was precious and dear to you? And was it through the end of a life? Was it the end of a marriage or the end of something else? Grief comes to us in many different ways, and usually we think of it as an end of life scenarios, but in actuality, it can come in many different ways. And so today, my guest is here to guide us on our grief journey, both as a griever and as we support someone else on their grief journey. So allow me to introduce my guest. Bradley Vinson is a husband to his better two-thirds, a father of three, a grandfather of five, and a servant. And it was through his journey of obtaining a master's in biblical and theological studies that Bradley encountered a life-changing event that shifted his ministry to serving the grieving community. And Bradley's a sought-after speaker and author of numerous articles on biblical, spiritual, and grief topics. And so welcome to the show, Bradley. How are things, brother?
Man, doing good. I appreciate you, Alan, for even having me here, man. I'm anticipating today and serving your guests, man, serving your audience.
Yes, and I know you're going to do a phenomenal job. Grief is something as men we don't tend to talk a lot about, and so I think it's really important that we have this conversation. And on this podcast, we always talk about everyone being on a hero's journey, and so I would like you to share a bit of your journey. Tell us about a time in your life when you knew things had to change. What did you do, and how that experience shaped you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing?
Wow. I would say my hero's journey did not start very heroic. It started with a phone call at my office, man. One morning I'm at my desk and a phone call comes in, and it was my wife, and she was just couldn't understand what she was saying. I just heard her say, the baby, gone. I mean, it was just kind of scattered. So then another call came through, and it was from Louisiana because I recognized the area code. And I pick up the phone, and it was the principal at my grandchildren's school. And he said, "Is this Mr. Vinson?" I said, "Yeah, this is he." He said, "Well, I'm the principal at your grandchildren's school, and I'm sorry to inform you, but your granddaughter died in an accident this morning.
Oh, man.
And you need to come now." And as I said, it wasn't very heroic, man. It was the lights went out, literally, in my life at that point. And so, as we go through the process of caring for my daughter and caring for and taking care of the business of funeralizing my 4-year-old granddaughter, a lot of life changes started to happen, man. And, and frankly, my daughter was estranged from her husband at the time. So I was now in the position of doing all the man stuff, so to speak, right? And so I'm calling the funeral home, and I'm calling friends of the family. I'm calling extended family, and literally re-traumatizing myself over and over, giving them the news that my 4-year-old granddaughter had died in an accident. And, once we go through that whole process and we funeralize her, and in the wake of all of that, she had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old brother. I mean, a 6-year-old brother. So a 2-year-old boy, 4-year-old girl, 6-year-old boy. And through things that have gone on in that process, my wife and I find ourselves raising, or we call it co-parenting, for our grandsons. So they came into our home at the ages of 2 and 6, grieving, heavily grieving the loss of their sister, while my wife and I are grieving the loss of our granddaughter, grieving because our daughter is grieving, and all of these things. And and I always would say that men, we're the thermostat, not the thermometer, right? So we create the temperature in our homes. And now that's even compounded because I have to do it in front of a 2-year-old and 6-year-old boy that now have to learn how to grieve, and now have to learn how to grieve as boys. I'm that example. And trying to do that, really, how the light kind of came on for me. My wife walks in and I thought I was doing pretty good at it. My wife walks in to me one day and she says, "It hinders my healing process when I don't see that you're trying to heal." And that was powerful. My wife was basically saying that it's she can't heal knowing that I'm not trying to heal. Because a lot of times as men, we lean into the pain as showing our love. I'm always going to be heartbroken. I'm always going to be this. And that's how I'm showing my love for my granddaughter. And she says, if I can't witness you trying to heal, I can't heal. And that was powerful to me because I thought I was doing okay. And I realized these 2 little boys are witnessing that too, right? So I had to show them the full array of emotions that a human can have, which men are included, right? But we emote everything through anger, right? We're sad, we're angry, we're frustrated or grumpy. I hate to use the word angry, but everything emotes as anger or grumpiness, right?
Yep.
So I had to show the boys that no, yes, you can cry. Yes, you can be sad. Yes, you can be all these things. And I had to set the example for that. So when my grandsons would come to me and say, "Papa, are you thinking about Alana?" Even if I wasn't, I said yes, because I knew they wanted to have a conversation. I knew they wanted to talk about their sister. Or they'll say, "Papa, how are you feeling right now?" And I said, "Papa is sad." I said, "I miss Alana," right? And I would cry in front of them, not boohoo cry, slobbing at the mouth, all in, not that kind of crying. But I had to show them full emotion and show them that, yes, you're allowed to be sad and you're allowed to cry. You can sit in Pawpaw's lap and get extra hugs, and do that snuggle time that boys aren't known for, right? And I had to do all those things. And it's amazing how a lot of men would say having a daughter softens them. But in my reality, having 2 grandsons softened me because I had to show them all it takes to be a man and all it looks like for a man to grieve. And I'm still in that process now, right? So that's the kind of, as the hero emerges, I guess you would say, right?
Yeah.
And in that process, as I was trying to, and even in the midst of that, right, I'm trying to figure out ways to help my family heal. And I couldn't find the literature I wanted. I couldn't find things that spoke to me as a grandparent and a man and a husband and raising boys that are grieving. I just couldn't find that content. And I'm a researcher at heart. So I started creating my own and started writing and started journaling, all the stuff that men don't do, right? And I started speaking and started doing these things and, tearing that band-aid off over and over and over until I got a scar, until it healed, right? And just doing that has become my journey. And I don't believe in things that people call the new normal. This was always my story. I just didn't know this part of it was coming. And that's how I want to look at it. And I feel called to what I do. And, I get the accolades and I get the, oh, you helped me and your voice is soothing. Oh, no, man, that's all cool. But then I'm bluntly honest too. I appreciate that, but I'd rather have my granddaughter.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of how that is. And so as the journey continues, there's people getting on that journey, 1 step, 2 step, 5 steps, 100 steps behind me. And I just feel obligated to help them because now I'm walking the journey. I want to show them that little trail that I'm digging through the forest, right? So they can have somewhere that they can walk a little bit more safely and a little bit more sure-footed. So that's my journey, man. That's in a nutshell, roughly what I'm walking right now.
And that is such a powerful story. Before we get going any further, I just want to say, Bradley, I see you, I hear you, and I honor your presence with us today to do what you're doing. And for men, and you touched on a few things and today, and we're going to hopefully explore a little bit deeper. But I wanted to. You'll see. I take lots of notes as you're talking. There's just so many great nuggets here. I want to make sure we touch on a few of them. You talked about, also how having to help your two grandsons that were left 2 and 6 years old. And I'm, the question, I had for you, do children grieve differently than adults do? And if so, what's some things that, as a parent, as a father, we can be aware of, things to maybe look out for?
Yeah, they obviously do because they're not as mature as us. They don't understand death like we do. What I've learned is that children have magical thoughts. So I mean, this is literally what happened to us. So as I said, our 2-year-old and 6-year-old grandson live with us now, but we go back and we visit their mom. We go back pretty constantly. And early on, the 2-year-old, we would age appropriate, tell him his sister's in heaven and different things like that. But every time he went back to his old house, he was looking for her
Wow.
because home meant sister. Home meant that's where she is. And so even being willing, and I actually created this acronym I call HELP, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but actually being able and willing to circle back to wherever that child is in their understanding, no matter how far we are on our journey, being willing to circle back to their understanding level is important. So let them have the magical thoughts. If you got to talk about it 50 times about she's in heaven, she's not here, she's in our hearts, things that a 2-year-old may or may not even understand, right? Because you're trying to figure out what is the 2-year-old psyche, right? And he retains it for a day, and then he'll ask about her. Well, are we going to see Alana? Where's Alana? Right? And so you have to keep doing that. Now, the 6-year-old, and this is a part that I didn't tell it in the story, but when I get to their school and the staff is consoling us and we're in the principal's office, and the principal looks at me and tells me, he said, Bryce, which is her brother, doesn't know that his sister passed away, and I think you should tell him. So they find this little private room and bring my 6-year-old grandson into me, and I literally start his grief journey. And that's a burden that I still carry to this day, 7 years later. I literally started his grief journey. And so I'm sitting there and I'm talking to him because he knew something was up because Paw is there from Texas and he's in Louisiana, right? And so we go in the room and I sit him on my lap I'm just asking and begging God for the strength to say the right things. And all I could come up with is accidents, right? And I said, well, sometimes we fall down and we have to go see a doctor. Sometimes we fall down, mom and dad can take care of it. Sometimes we fall down and we have to go see God. And I said, and Alana fell down when she has to go see God. And I said, and she's not coming home. She's with God. And so all he asked me is like, then he looks at me and he says, thank you, Paw, for telling me. And I literally start my grandson's grief journey. And so as we kind of go through this, right, his maturity and his understanding is high for a 6-year-old. And he knows what that means. And he just asked, he said, well, can I hug her one more time before, well, I said, you'll get to see her again. And I'm thinking in my mind, at her funeral.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking through that, should I even tell him that he can see her again? But at the funeral, he got to touch her hand, and then he couldn't sit through the funeral. We had to put him in another room, but he couldn't hug his sister again. And just all those things, right, that he couldn't do. And you look at the scope of children, the people you're supposed to be with for the majority of your life are your siblings, not your parents, not your wife, right? It's your siblings. In most cases, we're 5 years apart, maybe 3 years apart.
Right.
Those are the people that are with you most of your life. And now at the age of 2 and 6, that's severed for them, right? And we're stepping into all this new territory with these boys. And it's okay. Grief at 2 is different than grief at 6. But the 2-year-old's grief at 6 is different than his brother's grief at 6. And grief at 9 is different, right?
Right.
And that's where that acronym that I created came from. And it's help. How do you help children? Have the hard, honest conversations that are age appropriate. Express yourself. You got to be able to show emotion. Let them lead. And I got extra L's, lean in and love more. So be more affectionate, give extra hugs because their security is broken. And then P, have patience. Be willing to circle back where they are in their maturity level to meet them where they are. And that let them lead literally came from my 6-year-old grandson because we had a lot of Alana's stuff. We were the kind of grandparents that had rooms in our house for the grandkids. So they were already visiting before Alana passed away. So she had stuff at the house. Right. So now that the boys are moving in permanently, we had, okay, what do we do with Alana's things? We're not going to build a shrine to her in the house, but we're going to keep her stuff. And so we put it in a nice little bin with the pink top on it and stuff like that, put her toys in there. And then the boys would ask, can we get out Alana's stuff? We let them lead that. We said, sure. So we get the tissue boxes, we get some candy or some extra blankets, and we just spread out on the floor and open the box and start filling on her blankets and smelling them and playing with her toys and stuff like that. But the boys sometimes had to lead that. And so we just got to be willing as adults to, in some cases, grandma died, right? And the child is 4 years old. Now they're 8, and now they're asking, well, why did grandma die? How did grandma die? We can't get frustrated about that. We got to circle back and meet them where they are. Because as the boys get older, now it's the why. And even a little bit of anger in it. Well, why did that happen? And, and it's like, and you got to talk to him honestly, but as an 8-year-old, right? He doesn't need to know all the minutia. He doesn't need to know the details, but it's like, well, we don't get all our whys will never be answered. But you say that in a way that an 8-year-old can understand it, right? Yeah. Like we don't understand why the sun comes up at the exact same time every day. That's a why we'll never know. And so I can't give you a why at that realm why your sister's not here. Now, practically I can say why, because it was an accident and you know what I mean? But that's not what that conversation's about.
No.
And so you have to, I say, be prayed up and be cognizant and be open to going back and reopening wounds that you thought you got past because that child is just now experiencing it. So that's probably the biggest thing, the willingness to circle back and meet the child where they are is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, because truly we want to help, and we don't necessarily understand that when we start to have these conversations, being able to meet them where they're at. And I think what a great way to frame that. And the other thing you had said in your opening comments, you talked about men being the thermostat and not the thermometer. And I think what a great way to also frame that piece, because as we both have mentioned in the conversation, that men tend to the way we express emotion usually comes out of anger, and it's an anger that is hiding many things below it. And I
Right.
say that sometimes it's anger mixed with resentment, because we don't know how. Sometimes the resentment is for something or someone else, but more often than not, it's resentment for ourselves because we don't know what to do next.
Yep.
And so in your grief work with working with men, what are you finding that are maybe some commonalities, and how do they differ from grieving with women who grieve, and what advice do you have for that?
What's amazing about that? Usually, I have a talk that I call "Men Grieve Too," and I know it's not grammatically correct, but I would say men grieve too, dot, 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 just different. And grammar should be differently, but it just didn't sound right. But I always did a straw poll. Whenever I started the talk, I would do a straw poll because honestly, a lot of women more women show up than men, even for the men talk, right? And I would give a straw poll and I would say, who would you help? What would you do? Those are the two main questions. So, all things being equal, if you saw a man and a woman broken down on the side of the road, who would you stop first to help? To a person, everybody said the woman. That's okay. Question number 2, men and women separately, y'all answer separately. If your car broke down on the side of the road, what's the first thing you would do? And I'll give them 2 options. Most women, almost to a person, would say, I'd pick up my phone and call somebody. Most men would say, I'm going to get out and walk around the car and see what happened. I said, that's grief in a nutshell. When grief happens, everyone goes toward the woman. But also in grief, most men will say, I can figure this out. So it's a two-edged sword. Part of it is societal, that they're not even going to lean to us first. But then part of it is us saying, I can figure this out. And so it's not always society's fault what society put on us. Some of it is us. Right. And so it's never the blame game and things like that. But also, when you're dealing with things, I don't want to call it specialized things, but things like child loss, the further you are from being the birth mother, the less care you're going to get. Period. It's not a knock on nothing. It's just an analysis, right? It's not an indictment. It's an analysis. The further you are from being the birth mother, the less help you're going to naturally get, less instant help. So what I find with men is that we'll tend to, because we're project-based, we're do something based, right? The group talk and the kumbaya circles, I would say men do things more shoulder to shoulder, where women do things more knee to knee. Mm. So it's going to be easier to find women in a little group, and I call it circles and squares, right? So you got to give men something to do, and then their grief comes out. But I'll say this, in a lot of cases, what men tend to do more than women, will cocoon more, will ideate about death more, will do more things that lean into self-medication, and will tend to, our grief will also have physical ramifications on us and health ramifications. I have scars right now on my body from surgeries I had to have because I believe of my grief of my granddaughter. But I believe that, and sometimes I would say sometimes your timelines get mixed up because I could have been having some of these issues before she died, but when your life gets split into before someone died and after someone died, you tend to forget all that before they died thing, right? And so it's just your brain explodes, and it's like, well, did I have that thing 6 months before she died, or did that start? You don't, but I had to have surgeries anyway, and so there's that physical side of it. But I'll say this: men tend to grieve their manhood, and I tell men all the time, you can either grieve your loved one or grieve your ego. You can't do both at the same time. And also, you can't build enough birdhouses and fix enough cars not to grieve, right? Because we're project based, we want to fix stuff. So we think fixing cars is going to help us get through our grief or keep us from grieving. And I say grief is going to take its time, not take its time as being slow, but I mean snatch its time. And when we don't lean into it, which men typically don't, that's when those other things start to happen, right? The loss of relationship by extension and health issues and the self-medicating and things like that. And we'll tend to do more things that are could lead to our demise, though we act like that's not what we're trying to do, like we're not trying to kill ourselves, right? So we'll start skydiving, we'll start race car driving, we'll go out to the running of the bulls, and it's like you weren't doing none of that stuff before your loved one died. Now you want to go skydiving twice a week, right? So it's all that stuff that gets you on the edge of death. So if it happens to happen, I'm okay with it. But I wasn't trying to kill myself. It was a skydiving accident, right? Because we ideate about death so much, and we just think about it more than I think our feminine or lady counterparts do.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and it's the man thing, right? Because especially when a child dies, you think, what adult was at fault? Yeah. What could an adult have done different? What this, what that, right? And now I'm the man. What could have I had done different? What decision could I have made 3 months ago that could have made that not, all the stuff you can't control. But now I'm grieving my manhood, serve and protect and care for my family. And now I can't do that because my granddaughter's gone. So where did I fail in that process, right? And so on top of grieving your loved one, you start to grieve your manhood and grieve your ego and grieve, you feel you're lacking in your duties. And so you can only holistically grieve one thing at a time. You can't multitask grief, right? You can do a bunch of things at a mediocre level.
Yeah.
Or do one or two things very well, right? And grief is the same way. But yeah, so that's how I think in a general sense, men differ from women, in my point of view.
Yeah, it makes complete sense to me. I think, especially when you talked about that, about how we would grieve our manhood, our ego versus, the individual. And I think that's such a key point for us to make, in that for guys, we do tend to do that because we are project based. We do tend to look at how can we fix this? We get into do mode, and instead just having opportunity to just be in that space. And that's very uncomfortable for a lot of us because we don't know how to do that. And so the way we do it is through making ourselves busy. And like you said, taking extra risks, because now maybe the idea of life is so short, and then I need to pack all this stuff in. I was, as I was saying in my intro here, that, there's the other side of that coin too, where we're supporting somebody else who's grieving. And what would you say would be, if I was supporting someone, what would be something you would coach me on, avoid doing as they're going through on their grief journey?
Especially for men, I would say lean into what I call the golf rules, right? So the rules of golf basically are, if nobody asks you for help, don't give them any, right? If your buddy has a real bad swing and you're like, hey, do this and stand like this and grip it that way, that's not golf etiquette. When your buddy says, hey, man, I'm trying to get, that's when you got, see what I'm saying? And so that's how you actually treat men in grief, I feel. Because sometimes we will ask, sometimes we'll give the opening. I call it leaking. Right. So, hey, man, how's it going today? Well, it's going pretty good, man. But it's, been rough the past couple. Oh, tell me about that. Right. Versus, oh, man, I heard your granddaughter died. That's like, oh, yeah. And so think about how men typically conversate. Right. So if I wanted to attach to help a group of grieving men, I'm using air quotes here for help, but if I wanted to connect with a group of grieving men, I'd find something, a project like, okay, we're going to go build homes for Habitat for Humanity. Then we're up on the roof, we're nailing. Well, how's things going, man? Yeah, it's going pretty good, man. I've been going through a rough patch. I say, yeah, me too, man. I've been having this thing going on and raising my grandboys now. The sister Pat. See what I'm saying? And then the conversation comes out. You're painting the garage. You're doing this. That shoulder to shoulder thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave out some information. Tell them about this movie you just saw. Tell them about this thing you just read, but don't walk up and hand them a brochure. Don't do, it's like the typical man stuff, right? And I say this also. Forget the need or the desire to have to say something profound.
Mm-hmm.
The ministry of presence is probably the most powerful thing it can be. Now, my love language is touch and time. So I'm kind of really leaning in, I used to do marriage ministry and stuff like that. So, I had to learn all those things. And my wife and I was doing these things together in our ministry. But I realized that my love language is touch and time. But what's crazy about that, in a general sense, men can bond through silence. I can be in a car with another dude and we can drive from here to California. And the only time we say something to each other when we're going to stop and get something to eat. Where you want to eat at? We're about 800 miles in, right? But we cool. I don't have to talk the whole 800 miles. My grandson is starting to get that way. He's 14 now. And the conversations are getting less. Fewer words, but more impactful. So being present gives the opportunity for conversation versus trying to say something profound. And what I've found, because a lot, by extension, a lot of my wife's friends or ladies and other ladies that know me, something happens and they'll say, oh, my husband just lost his uncle. Can you have Brad give him a call? And it's like, okay, I don't know your husband. I'm just some dude. Now, what I can tell you to do is say, hey, babe, I know you're hurting and it's okay that you're hurting. And I just want to be available to you if you want to talk. And now I know this guy, and see how that works versus hey, I'm Chaplain Vinson. Hey, your wife asked me to give you a call. That ain't going nowhere typically. But even if it's my dear friend, a dear friend of mine recently lost his uncle, actually his brother-in-law. So his wife lost a brother, but he was so close to him when he passed away, right? He was really down. And he's a dear friend of mine. But the lady, which is also a very good friend of our family, she called my wife. My brother passed away. My husband's taking it real hard. Could you ask Brad, just give him a buzz? Now, I had that opening already because we had a relationship, but I didn't call him to talk about his brother-in-law, right? I called because I hadn't talked to him in a while. Hey, man, how's it going? And then I pushed it the other way. I heard your wife's brother pass away. I'm sorry to hear that. Let her know. I had already talked to her, but let her know we love her, and we asked about her. He said, yeah, man, he was a good dude. Like, oh, really? And so that was that conversation, right? So now he wants to talk about his loss of his brother-in-law. Instead of me calling, hey, man, it's Brad, man. I know you feeling down, right? No, right? So it's like, it's that ministry of presence. Just be available for talking or not, right? Because we'll cocoon fairly quickly. So give us something to do, let us loosen up, and then just make it part of conversation.
Man, I love that. And what a great way to model this idea of having to hold space or create space. We don't need to. Space to me is about that environment that allows whatever to happen.
Right.
To be ready to accept what's coming through. And I love how you put that together. So it makes a lot of sense for for us, and the idea of the ministry of presence far more powerful than trying to say something that we think is so profound, which is falls so short to
Yes.
what its intent, and we'll leave the profound speeches for Sunday morning.
Indeed.
Opposed
Indeed.
to those times. I noticed in doing some research and getting ready for today, you have this rule called 100 to 0.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come up with that, and how does this serve us?
Yeah. A lot of times when I'm out speaking and doing different stuff like that, man, it's like as grievers, we have a frustration with the people that are not grieving. And I try to flip that on its head, right? Because it's like, even as a griever, you have a certain responsibility. I'm not going to let us off the hook. Yes, grief is part of our story, but it's our story. But with that, I tell other grievers, the 100-0 rule is you are 100% in control of making others aware of your grief. You are 0% in control of how they respond to your grief.
Nice.
And so as a griever, we tend to, well, how are they going to look at me if I cry? How are they going to do this if I do that? It's like, that's not my burden. I lost a loved one. I'm grieving. So I need to know that I'm in control of making you aware that I'm grieving. But how you respond to my grief is on you. I'm not going to take on that burden. Because I even had people not long after my granddaughter's funeral, a lady walks up to me at church and she says, "Oh, I want to show you something. This gives me strength." She opens up her Bible and it was the program for my granddaughter's funeral. And I started crying. She slams her Bible shut. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Brother Vincent." I'm like, "No, hold on. Whenever you want to talk about my dear Alana, please do that. But I need you to be okay with my tears.
Yeah.
Be okay being uncomfortable. Because I want you to talk about her. But sometimes you talking about her is going to induce tears. But I'm not going to stop crying. But I don't want you to stop talking about her either. So that needs to be our agreement. Talk about her as much as you want to. But if I cry, you got to be okay with that. Right? Because I can't take on the burden of how you feel about my tears. And I sit and I think the things I'm going through are not unique. Yeah, I got the Bradley version of it, but it's not unique. A lot of grieving people feel that way. And it's like, well, I don't want to go out in public because I might cry. And I don't want to do this because I'm disheveled because I hadn't done my hygiene well in a week. And you're grieving. You got other stuff on you. Yeah, but you got to go buy groceries. You got to raise kids. Throw a cap on and go to the store. And it doesn't matter that your shirt is wrinkled, right? Yeah. Stop worrying about what other people think. Stop, because every time I never realized this until my granddaughter died. At the front of Walmart and Target and stores like that, all the girls' clothes is right up front. I never noticed it until she died. And her favorite colors are pink and purple. So I'd walk into Target, especially around Easter, and the whole front of the store is pink. And I would lose it. I have to go back to the car. And I was like, but that's not Target's fault. That's not the other people's shopping's fault. That's my grief. It's mine. So I got to figure out a way to maneuver this thing. And that's a long way for me from, being completely vulnerable here. The week that she died, we're in Walmart looking for little things for the funeral and going to department stores to look, for what she's going to wear and all these things. And I found myself hugging girls' clothes in Walmart, just weeping because I wanted her that bad. Just weeping, uncontrollably weeping. And one of the people working at Walmart came to the aisle about the same time that another customer did. And obviously the customer was in shock. And the lady walks up to me. She was like, "Are you okay?" So I said, "I just lost my granddaughter this week." And so she actually stood guard on the aisle and let me stay in that aisle hugging clothes. But she gave me that space. She didn't try to say nothing profound. She was just like, "This man is hurting." And we got to be that lady. Don't try to tell me something to make me feel better. Just give me my space to get through that. And I learned from my grandson, man, not to be all over the place. I'm all over the place now, but I learned from my grandson, tears are like medicine. Because after you do it, you feel better. And that lady gave me the space to feel better, not try to rush me into the men's bathroom and give me a bunch of tissues. And she's like, this hour, we grab tissue and hand them tissue. And unconsciously, we're saying, please stop crying. What we should do instead is wait for the snot, which is when we have almost cried ourselves out, our nose starts to run. And we're pretty much through crying by then. You give them a tissue to wipe their nose. And that's not a please stop crying gesture anymore. That's a your nose is running. And kind of thing, right? And so it's like just those little things mean so much to people because we don't even realize we're doing it. Tears mean tissue.
Yeah.
But we're unconsciously because how many times have you heard a person? How many times has a person that's been crying that you handed tissue say, I'm sorry? Think about that. Almost every time.
Yep.
Because what we're doing is saying, your tears are upsetting me. And they say, I'm sorry for crying. I'm sorry. You ever notice that? Almost 100% of the time, when you hand somebody crying tissue, they say they're sorry.
That's truth all the way.
And we don't, and that's something I learned on my own. That's something that just dropped in my spirit one day. It was like, but you don't know until you're there.
Yeah.
Because I know how many tissues I've handed out over the years. I mean, I've been doing couples ministry and wives start crying about issues unresolved with their husbands and husbands start crying. And we got a box of tissue on every table. And I said, nope, we're taking all this tissue out of here. Once my granddaughter died, I took all the tissues off the tables.
Yeah.
So now when somebody starts crying, we let them lean into that. And then we'll post up a box of tissue and when they're like, okay, I'm okay now. There you go. Because I want to visually show you that it's okay for you to cry. I'm not going to hand you tissue right off the bat.
I love that. That's so profound. Just love that. This month, every month in our group mentorship program, we always have a book of the month. And this month, our book is the top 5 regrets of the dying by Bronnie Ware. And so it made me think, as we're going to talk about grief today in your work, what would be the top 5 regrets of the grievers when they encounter things? Are there any commonalities that you're finding that regrets that they have about the one that's no longer with us?
Wow. I would say the life you wish they had. That's probably one of the top things, is that you start imagining this pie in the sky life for them that they may or may not have lived had they still been here. So that becomes a regret for you that you weren't able to witness that, or they actually have that. Another thing is we regret any arguments or chastisements or time, especially children, that we put them in timeout or didn't let them have their favorite cookie or didn't let them wear their favorite shirt. We harp on all of that. And my wife did for years. I remember it might have been 2 or 3 Sundays before Alana passed away. She was wearing a blue dress to church, and she wanted to wear this lime green headband thingy. And my wife kept saying, it doesn't match your dress. You can't wear it. Doesn't match your dress. You can't. And her and Alana went back and forth all morning. So Alana was grumpy. I mean, grumpy, that she wasn't allowed to wear this headband that messed up her outfit, as my wife would call it, right? And my wife grieved that.
Oh.
I mean, she was like, I should have let her wear that. I said, baby, you didn't know that she wasn't going to be with us now. And so those are the biggest type of regrets because if I would have known, yeah, she would have ate candy and watched movies every night. If I would have known I'd only have her until she was 4, right? I would never put her in timeout. And when she had her little temper tantrums, I would just hug her and kiss her until she started laughing instead of putting her in timeout, right? And so those are the kind of things I think most of our regrets. I don't really have a top 5, but I think most of them are encompassed inside of that imaginary pie in the sky life that we think they would have had they still been here, and how many things we would have changed had we known they wouldn't be here. I think to me, those are the 2 biggest kind of regrettable things, which of neither we have control over, which leads me to this. In grief, pain is a given. Suffering is optional and usually self-inflicted.
Amen, brother.
And probably because I don't harp on regrets a lot, because that leans into that suffering arena. Something we do to ourselves that's going to always be on top of our grief, but we usually self-inflict that. And if at anything, that's what I try not to do, is add on.
Yeah.
Because grief is hard enough as it is. And self-inflicted suffering through regrets is just something we can't battle because we can't resolve that. We have to literally let that go because we can't resolve it.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for sharing that. And absolutely, those are things that we need to be able to let go. Of everything that we spoke about today, Brother Bradley, and maybe there's something we didn't get a chance to touch on, what would be the one takeaway you'd like our audience to have?
I think in a general sense, we're all experts in our own grief. And no matter who you talk to, no matter who you go see, no matter what book you read, what video you watch, unfortunately, it's your individual journey. But I will say there are people that are willing to walk some of it with you if you allow them, and come out of the shell and allow some people to walk with you. It makes the burden lighter. Doesn't make it go away, but it makes it lighter. And just give other people opportunity to love on you. It helps. So I would just probably say that's the biggest thing.
Man, love that. What a great way to wrap up our conversation today. Once again, I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us. You've given us men an opportunity to really lean into grieving and be able to be in a better place to support others, the ones around us that we love and care for, on their grief journey. So if men are interested in getting a hold of you and participating in your work and helping them do their grief journey, what would be the best way for them to do that?
The easiest way is probably my website, which is myname.com, bradleyvinson.com. I'm trying to make that the hub of everything. I'm working on a YouTube channel right now too. But go to bradleyvinson.com and reach out to me there through email, grab some resources, and love to work with you.
Absolutely. I'll make sure that's in the show notes for today's episode. Once again, thank you so much, my friend. I really enjoyed this conversation and would love to have you back.
Anytime.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.